Martin. How are you?
I'm going to go ahead and call us to order and declare that we have a quorum of 7 members present. Takes us to item C1, consideration, discussion, possible action related to the 2019-20 budget development process. Dr. Ely.
Thank you, Mr. President, members of the board. We begin the annual spring and summer odyssey of adopting a budget for the next academic year. And so just a reminder for everybody on the board, we have to make approval of the budget for the 2019-2020 school year by the end of August and set the tax rate at that time. But we will take months now to look at the various parameters that we have before us and what goes into crafting a budget. So what we will have tonight for the group to consider is just a look back at some of the historicals of our budgets over the last several years and a little bit of information as we know it right now. And I'll just pull the curtain back a little bit and say what you're going to see tonight is based on current law. Because we don't have any new law. We've got a lot of legislation that's been filed and things that are being discussed, but right now we know about Chapter 41 and Chapter 42 of the Texas Education Code, and still there are some changes to that. We have to move forward knowing what we know about current law, and we are very hopeful that some positive changes will be coming, and we do appreciate the House and the Senate both for filing school finance bills that would add significant dollars to public school finance for next biennium. However, none of that work is finished, and we will have to see what ultimately happens with those. So what Mr. Martindale will have for you today is, as I said, is a review of kind of where we've been and kind of what we're looking at under current law. So with that, I'll throw it over to the Deputy Superintendent and Chief Financial Officer, Mike Martindale. Mr. Martindale.
Thank you, Dr. Ely. Thank you, Dr. Ely. The first month of 6 months. So get to visit with you guys for 6 months. So mark your calendar from here through August. So we'll begin taking a look at the process. And as Dr. Ely mentioned, lots going on in Austin right now. At the end of the presentation, I'll kind of show you our current circumstances under the current school finance system, and very optimistic that we'll see some change coming out of Austin that will have some influence on our current state of affairs. In the presentation, we'll take a look back at our historical data, enrollment, our average daily attendance, which influences our finances, past property value growth, past tax rates, those types of things that all play in a tremendous amount with our budget. Also touch on the current year budget, visit with you a little bit on where we are with that, and then we'll begin to take a look at some of the dates associated with creating the 1920 budget, as far as directors and principals submitting different requests, those types of things. Staffing requests and exceptional item requests also that are part of our budget process and timeline. And then again, lastly, showing you some assumptions and where that puts us currently, as if nothing changes at all for next year. The slide is just our enrollment. So you see quite a bit of enrollment several years back. I'll just take example 12-13 to 13-14, 600 kids, added almost another 800 the following year, plus another 5 going into 15-16. Here recently, we've had a little bit of growth, but we're starting to flatten out. It's just not growing as quickly as we experienced these several years back. From 16-17 to 17-18, that was 450 kids. This year, relative to PEIMS, the PEIMS snapshot, we're down 106 students versus last year's enrollment number. And remember, we did plan for about a 136 decline when we prepared our budget. So we're tracking right about where we projected or anticipated going into this school year. Our average daily attendance, and this one's, your enrollment can be, you have tremendous enrollment, but if kids aren't coming to school, then it doesn't generate the revenue from the state's perspective. It also impacts, of course, more along the lines of what we pay in recapture than actually any state revenue. But so your average daily attendance is really the one that plays into the calculation for school finance. If you go back the years that I just mentioned when we had those really big growth in enrollment, 800 kids or 7, 6, I think I mentioned for a couple of years, those are reflective in the percentages of average daily attendance. And this is year over. So this is 6.22% above the previous year. And as I mentioned to you, our enrollment numbers started flattening a little bit. So this is where you see the 1.72%. Last year, we finished 2.79% over previous year. These are end of year numbers. For 18-19, the one you see here on the end, that is through the fourth 6 weeks of this current school year. So I would anticipate that value going a little bit more negative on us because traditionally through the course of the year, attendance tends to get a little bit worse. But again, we plan for an ADA of a -1%. So we're going to probably beat that at the end of the year a little bit.
What is the biggest outlier because of, with that? What do you attribute that being negative this year compared to the previous years not being?
That's
The opening of the charter school.
charter school, directly related to the opening of the charter school this year, the loss on enrollment, and then, of course, with the ADA charter school. I want to just kind of mention these last three because I'm going to move to another slide or two, but just remember these slower growth years here as of recent, the last couple of years. So I just wanted to mark those for you because I'm going to reference back to those here in just a moment. Here's our property value growth, our frozen growth year over the previous year. Some real strong years, a couple, in 16, 10.42%, 11.74 last year. And again, that's an average of 7.13% growth since 2012. This year, current year we're in, we experienced a 6.75% growth on our freeze adjusted values. When you get a combination of these really high growth and property value, and then when we just the ADA that I showed you just the slide before, the slower growth in ADA, this is exactly, we had the perfect storm kind of situated on us. This is exactly what sends you into recapture because your values are going up, your appraised values, and you have fewer kids to divide that by, so your value per kid goes up higher. And that's when you become subject to recapture. That's when TEA starts capturing that revenue off of what they consider an equalized wealth level. A past history of our tax rates, of course, the blue, the $1.04 of our maintenance and operations, that's been steady for us. That's what pays the day-to-day bills, payroll, everything. Yes, you're all familiar with that. The red is our INS, our debt service payments. You can see from 15-16 to 16-17, we had an increase. That is due to the first half sale of 2015 bond. I think it was $67 million. It went up a little bit more in 17-18. That was the second half sale of the 2015 bonds. This past year, we were able to reduce our INS rate. We had some debt come out from 2013, so that allowed us to reduce our INS rate by 2.6 cents. Very much, I'll tell you now, we'll be reducing our INS rate for next year. Absolutely, we anticipate being able to reduce that somewhat. This is my favorite slide. As Dr. Ely said, every presentation I have with the administrative team, I include this slide. It might not even be on school finance, but I put this slide in anyway. Blue line is local property tax revenue for our budget. The red line is the state revenue. And you can see this is exactly the trend that's occurring throughout the state. I think at this point in time, throughout the state, 68% of school funding of public schools is through local taxpayer money, 32% from the state. That's collectively through the state. We're not even doing that well in this particular situation. And I'm probably being somewhat generous to the state in this situation because we do have to book our TRS on behalf as a revenue, but it's really just an in and out. It's just an accounting feature. We don't actually recognize that money. So honestly, that if I remove TRS on behalf out of the equation, it would take that last point down below to about the 4 million mark. So in essence, we truly will recognize about 10.6 in revenue from the state this year, and our recapture payment is 14.6. So we would be in the negative 4 million.
Can we go back to I think I did not do a good job asking the question when I asked it a minute ago. I realized the enrollment's down due to the charter school. You had said on that last number that you expect that number to go further negative.
Oh, why? Oh, okay. Just historically through the course of the year, I'm sorry, now you're asking about the 6 weeks. Typically, attendance rates just go down through the course of the year because you get to the spring, the end of the school year. I don't know why, I just know historically, you have beautiful days like today, I guess. But historically, your attendance rate tends to trend down throughout the course of the school year. Now, I will mention this, and I'm hopeful, but I'm not sure because I'm watching it day to day, is our attendance is ticking up just a little bit, but I don't know if that will translate in the attendance rate, if that makes, excuse me, our enrollment is ticking up a little bit.
So it's average daily attendance is how many kids we have and how often they come to school. So we do see a rise in that as we go throughout the year towards we get to October, November, because we have more kids that we're usually adding throughout the year, and it kind of levels off. And then we get cold and flu season, and then it'll kind of start to drop towards the end of the year. Usually we're holding on the enrollment side of it, we're holding pretty strong this year. And we haven't had at least the flu incidents that we have had last year. It was really bad. This academic year, it's been less widespread and less long in duration. So yeah, thank you.
Right.
Yeah, that's why we do see those numbers. They kind of peak and that percentage gets just a little bit lower.
Typically, you'll take your biggest hits on attendance rate between the second and third 6 weeks of the year. So kind of that November, December, and then January, February. Because last year flu was terrible. It really put a hurt on us.
It is now.
But you did a good job answering that, as I was wondering what was going to happen to keep on making that number go down, since the flu season would be hopefully over.
Hopefully.
We plan for a -1. I'm hoping to see, well, when the fifth 6 weeks ends, then it'll set up because the last 6 weeks won't move that average too terribly much. Past budgets, when we landed on those, of course, you can see the year, what was adopted, where the audit came in, and if we were making Chapter 41 recapture payments at the time. I can tell you about part of the way as we were in the 16-17 year, began to, with our projections out, realize that we were about to go into recapture. So we got pretty tight, a little conservative on things so we could put a little money back, anticipating current year and what could happen to us next year if no adjustments are made. So we're able to put a few dollars back in our fund balance the last several years. Of course, this year, you're all familiar with this. We adopted a 4.6 deficit. We're in progress. In our budget, we planned for a 14.6 million recapture payment. I think it's going to settle in right at about 14.4 actually. So we'll come into the good a little bit better on that. That number moves on you, of course, through the course of the year also because that's relative to your attendance rate and those types of things. What we adopted current year, local revenue of 104.6 million. I do anticipate to have a budget amendment next month or the following month. I think we'll be increasing that projected revenue for this year. State revenue, I'll leave around the same. Federal revenue in your financials tonight, budget amendment, you'll see this SHARS number, our federal revenue going from 1.7 to 1.9. So we're generating a little more revenue there. So that's included in this month's financials. And again, recapture, I have not adjusted that. While I still think we'll come in just a couple $100,000 better. I'll wait to the end of the year to make sure. The 4.6, we're going to, again, over the next couple of months, I'll start making a few amendments with this stuff. We're really only halfway through the financial year, but we're going to beat that number. I can tell you that now. How much, I'm not sure. But we'll beat the 4.6.
By beating, you mean be better than that?
Right. Absolutely. Yes. That's why I'm sorry. Should have clarified. We'll come in with
Less
a
of a deficit.
less of a deficit than this. 1920 timelines as we prepare and create our budget for the upcoming school year. There's a lot of dates on here. Non-personnel exceptional item requests were due before spring break. This is where directors and principals, our administrators, can request one-time purchases that may fall outside of their regular operation budget. New personnel staffing requests are due this Friday. This is for, of course, any staffing ads that directors or campuses are requesting for the upcoming school year. Receive our preliminary values from the appraisal district on April the 30th. Those are certified typically the week after we have our July board meeting. And of course, in August, as Dr. Ely mentioned, we'll come forward with a proposed budget and the tax rate to support that. Exceptional items and new personnel requests are received for consideration at this point in time. For new personnel requests for next year, we've received $1.5 million in requests. This does not include the $850,000 that we're going to need for personnel to open Riverbend Elementary School. So that's a separate number. This is not an all-inclusive list. This is just some examples at the district level. Curriculum and Instructional Director of Fine Arts and Coordinator of Social Studies, and in operations, the Director of Safety, and additional maintenance and custodial staff. We've added, as you are all aware, 3 campuses last 3 years, and probably a time we start looking at catching up with some of the maintenance positions and those types of things. Campus level, the high schools, 1 additional school resource deputy for each of the comprehensive high schools. And I did have a couple of elementary school requests for full-time librarians, not all, just a few. So as I'm presenting this now, I'm sure I'll get the remaining ones tomorrow. So anyway, those are some examples of the new personnel requests. Exceptional items, furniture. There's miscellaneous different items from the campuses listed here. Cypress Grove, Creekview, and Pebble Creek was a soundboard, I believe, and some radios from Creekview. Classroom library is Cypress Grove. So just miscellaneous items from the campuses, miscellaneous athletics for the campuses listed, as well as some fine arts requests from College Station High School. District level from Curriculum and Instruction Department, MAP assessment, and operations, increases to operations and capital outlay budgets were requested as well. So those are what we have thus far. And we'll go back and revisit new personnel requests. These positions by no means add up to 1.5 million. Some of the costs I have in here, for example, with the school resource deputy, I know we have to purchase vehicles and all the materials that go with them. So I tag those costs along with them here because I know there's going to be some one-time startup costs. So that kind of pushes that number up as well. All right, everybody sit down. Oh, you already are. All right, so 1920. So if we ran things as current school finance system, recapture still there and everything else, then this is what things would be looking like for us, or what they do as of right now. Some of the assumptions on the revenue side, if I use 2.9% growth in ADA, that's the most recent projection from Templeton, and we'll get a spring update from them as well. So if in their spring update they adjust next year's growth, then I'll recognize that here as well. The last 8 years, we've had a 3.3% increase. The notes is that 0.14% for current year, that's through the 4-6 weeks. So as that number moves, it won't necessarily move that one, but it can kind of create some variation in the numbers that I'll show you. If I utilize a growth of 6.5% next year, we've had an average of 7.13 the last 7 years. Current year was 6.75, and you see the previous 3 prior to that. And that was reflected in one of the charts I showed you early on. So using these assumptions, ADA growth of 2.9, local value, property value growth of 6.5. On the appropriation side, we earmark $1.4 million for salary adjustments, which is right in line with what we did last year. That's 1.5% across the board and $750 for teachers. Nothing with health insurance increases. Last year, we added an additional $56,000. That ensured that we had one no-cost plan available to our employees. Held our supplies and materials budget where it is. Increased that about $70,000 last year because we did some things with our campus budget allocating. Set aside $500,000 to address some of the position and exceptional item requests I just mentioned. Here's some historical data on those. For the year we're in, we did approve over $1 million of new personnel and $634,000 of sectional item requests. The year prior, $1 million of new personnel and $112,000 of exceptional item requests. So this just gives you some historicals of what we've been able to do the last 2 years. Riverbend Elementary is running right at $850,000 for new cost. Here's payroll cost for Pecan Trail and Welborn we've had the last 2 years. So this is something else. It just costs money to open new schools. It's a positive thing that we're adding those for the kids in the community, but we do have some startup costs. So you can that's one thing that's created some additional run in our payroll the last few years in addition to managing recapture.
Quick question on, if you go back one slide. When we're talking about the property values, and you might not know this number, but when you're talking about, what is that number? Do you even have a clue? I know I'm not being
that percent over. Right now, our collective values are a little over 10 billion. So it's a safe assumption to say in each percentage of revenue off that runs you about $1 million.
Okay.
Yeah, so, and it is real clean math right now because we're tracking right at 10.1 billion, I believe.
Mrs. Noel has a question.
I was just going to say, just to be clear, you're always separating out the additional costs for opening schools from
New personnel requests.
personnel.
Yes.
Okay.
So these for 2018-19, yes, we had Welborn at 2.4, and we had additional staff beyond that of $1 million. Makes sense. So I always separate out the new campus as we're getting it up and going.
And to follow up on his question, the 6.5% estimate you have, we'll refine that once the appraisal district starts giving us preliminary numbers, and then we go through the appeals process before the August budget's actually passed.
Absolutely. This is, for our friends over here, that is simply an average based on last year. And yes, when we get preliminary values, I'll adjust that to an actual projected number. That is just based really, it's an assumption. I'm basing it on an average and what we did last year. So there's nothing more, nothing less other than a starting point.
And
So
of course, again, this is under current law and doesn't have anything to do with revenue caps or anything else
Right.
that would come through that. So we've got a lot of talking to do and a lot of adjusting to do based on what starts moving through the legislative pipeline.
I was simply trying to establish some parameters to run some initial numbers. And of course, our friend recapture will go from 14.4, 14.6 to right at $18 million.
So I just want to make sure that I'm understanding this correctly. On the previous slide, just want to point it out, the additional positions, the requests, sorry.
Oh, it's right
So
here.
it's
Yes,
requested 1.5 million so far,
correct.
but the assumption is that we would only grant 500,000. So we're saying we would have to cut, we wouldn't be able to fulfill the requests.
So what we do is we start right here and we put a placeholder value in there of $500,000. And that has historically in the past moved up as we've gone through the process, and certain other numbers have moved down. And so it's
Sure.
just a starting point with that. We want to make sure we had a value in there so we could adjust
Okay.
that as we go through the process.
Okay.
As things start becoming more and more clear based on current law and how things work with, as we start getting property values and we have a better understanding of our projected enrollment for next year and where we're going to end up on ADA this year, we'll start refining these month to month. So
Okay.
our endeavor tonight is to kind of give you just the, what could possibly be the worst case scenario, and this
Okay.
is kind of where we're doing.
Okay.
And I do think it is important to note that I think you're on track in the sense that rarely have I ever seen it
Right.
that people get everything they ask for.
Correct.
And that's okay. I mean, that's why we pay administrators to prioritize and figure out where the most critical needs are and then fund those positions. Is that fair to say
I would
that
say
you
it's
do
very
that?
fair. Yes, sir.
Okay.
But also, too, I mean, in the last 2 years, we've granted $1 million each year, and we're starting at 500,000, and we already have 1.5 in needs. So it's, and again, I know that you're trying to balance the numbers of what we're given and what we're, with this recapture, but it's pretty startling to
What
see
you
the
need to see
difference.
the next
You're
slide.
not startled
Oh.
yet.
You're not
boy.
startled
I'm
enough.
about to startle you.
Oh, boy.
Yeah. So
time for a start.
if we establish these parameters and I ran them through the funding template for next year under current law, nothing changed whatsoever. And we utilize, if they pass a new school finance law in the next few months, obviously every bit of this is going to change. Okay. Then this is where we would be starting to dig ourselves out from. So there we are. So I think, again, I do believe this is worst case scenario, and I'm optimistic that some positive things are going to happen. So this is if absolutely nothing occurred whatsoever, this is where we have to start working our way down from.
So I think it's important for us to know that as a board leadership team. It's important for our community to know. I think it's important for our legislators to know as well. School finance is an important concept. It's an imperative for the state and for College Station ISD. Our friends in Bryan, our friends in the Brazos Valley are going to need some additional help from the legislature. I am optimistic that it's going to happen. I believe that we have people who are in Austin this year that are committed to making it happen. What that ends up looking like for us remains to be seen. But I think this just underscores our need to be vigilant in our work with those who represent us in Austin, to make sure that they know how important it is for this school district and for so many others. I mean, we're projected to give back under current law $18 million. Other districts, I was looking at Plano ISD's over $220 million, Austin's $500 million. I mean, there's significant impact that this legislation and additional up to $9 billion can have on local school districts and school kids all across the state.
House Bill 3 and Senate Bill 4, those are the school finance legislation that's been filed thus far. We'll watch our ADA and our enrollment through the course of the rest of the year, and what projections we receive from Templeton later this spring, of course, and our appraisal values, whatever may happen in school finance. Who knows? Maybe Chapter 41 doesn't become an issue for us if there are some changes made, which would absolutely help us get our feet back under us very quickly. Also, of course, as we become aware of whatever adjustments are made there, then we can revisit the the request, whether it's staffing or exceptional item, and of course, salary. So we have more, hopefully, capacity to take care of our people.
When will we get an update on the healthcare cost?
I think we typically receive those in June. The updated premiums. Yes, sir. First part of June, I believe. Be happy to field any additional questions at this point.
Anyone? That's one way to make a $4.6 million deficit look good.
Look good.
Yeah. All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
That takes us to item C2. Consideration, discussion, possible action related to board policy FMG local regarding student travel. Dr. Ely,
That's me.
that's you. I was just gonna, well, I guess I can let you give a little recap of what we're doing and why.
Sure. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2. Let me know if I don't have enough. Passing it around. What I'm passing around is some of the information that was asked for last month when we discussed this particular item. Just a reminder that this is board policy FMG, which is a local policy. It's our up to us to decide what we want to do with this particular policy, and it governs out-of-state trips for people like band, drill team, choir, pep squad, cheerleaders, athletic teams, and so forth. A couple of the key items that are a part of board policy FMG local are that these trips are restricted to students who are in 9th through 12th grade, and that students are allowed to take these trips, or groups are allowed to take trips no more than once every 2 years, and that's down from what it was before 2012 when it was once every 4 years. This was asked to be put on the agenda, and we had a discussion about it at the February board workshop. You asked us to get a little bit more information, and we have that for you now. How does this thing work? Oh, you're going to work it. Thank you. So the first thing I wanted to just share with you is some of the information that was asked for, and it has to do with some other policies that were found around the state. I do appreciate Ms. Green doing a little bit of work as well, a little bit of bird dogging, and finding some of these, and we did as well, and we put some of those others. I've highlighted in blue for board and green the superintendent, because most of the policies actually have standard language where the approval is either granted by the board or the superintendent. So as you scroll through on yours right there, you can see oftentimes the superintendent, sometimes it's the board. Some districts chose not to handle this through board policy at all, but they handle it through their administrative regulation. And administrative regulations are things that we don't get a chance to see. That's something that they have in district that we don't have can't see on their website like we do with the board policy. Some districts actually have no policy FMG local at all. Huntsville, Magnolia, Georgetown, Tomball, and Waco don't. They do have FMF, which is a little bit different for competitive groups there, but they don't have FMG. We also went back. If you would please, Chuck, scroll to the next big table. You will see these are trips that were taken since 2015. We went back to 2015 because the 2014-15 school year was the first year that College Station High School had 4 grades of students in the school. So it was really their first opportunity to have a full set of students in these activities and take a number of these trips. And you'll see that you'll see a lot in March and April of 2015. Chuck, if you scroll a little bit, you kind of get to 2017, you'll see them showing up again in March and April of 2017. You'll see a lot at both comprehensive high schools. Scroll again, you'll see where we are now, March of 2019, and we've had a lot of trips occur just this this spring break and right before spring break for the 2019 year. Chuck, if you scroll just a little bit more, over the last 4 years, I guess it is, since going back to 2015, we've had 25 trips total that were taken at an expense to those who are having to raise these funds of a little over $1.8 million. Just would remind folks that this is not school district funds that are being used for it. These are funds that are raised through the fundraising process, or simply writing checks, or a combination of that, to be able to go on these trips. As you see, as you go through that, most of those trips occur in the odd years. So 15, 17, 19, and we would anticipate again in 2021 under current policy. One other thing that was asked was, if we were to change this policy to additional grade levels beyond 9th through 12th grade, if we were to extend that to 7th and 8th grade, for example, would we have any more of a liability that we would bear on that? So we did run that down as well. And, the district still does have governmental immunity in these trips as we're taking as school-sponsored trips. There is no additional risk that we would face from a legal point of view based on the age of the student. As a practical component of this, we could experience a greater deal of hijinks with younger kids than you might expect with older kids, but that would be something that we might want to consider. But as far as our liability, we would not. So that's some of the information that we were asked to bring back to the group. I'd love to, answer any questions on this or hear any comments that you may have, and get some other information later if you'd like for me to share based on some staff input as well.
Does the district pay anything to cover administrators or sponsors that have to go?
For sponsors, we do cover the sponsor fees through that, but what's the word I'm looking for? Who are the other people that go? Chaperones, excuse me, chaperones we do not. No, we don't cover for sponsors either. Sorry, we do not cover any for the sponsors as well.
The fees are usually covered, the sponsor fees are usually covered through the fees that the students pay.
Thank you, Mr. Glenwinkle. So no, district funds are not expended on this.
I think one thing that stands out as I look at, and I've looked at some of these and your additional ones, is that it looks like, and please correct me if I'm wrong, that we're the only school that has the delineation of high school. The rest is just any upon approval, any out of state.
We're the ones the only ones that we've been able to find who delineate that in board policy. I think others would delineate that perhaps in their administrative regulations, which we don't get a chance to see.
Got it.
What you'll see, a couple of them say it's up to the superintendent or board to approve, and then they have to follow the approval in accordance with the administrative regulations in there. So there's quite possibly
Right.
that prohibition in others as well.
Got it.
So did you get any staff feedback?
Yes, I did get some staff feedback in regards to this. We had right before the week before spring break, we had our Wednesday success team meeting, which is our normal meeting of administrators throughout the district. I asked the principals of the middle schools and high schools to come in and to give me some feedback on this particular issue. They were obviously are in the audience and were aware of kind of the conversation that was had at that time. And really, we talked about just the overall concept of student travel and asked for their feedback on a couple things that were brought up last month, which was, should we extend the age past grades 9 through 12, and should we consider whether we have removed the restriction on every other year, allowing a group to be able to go every year if they wanted to. So I'm going to kind of summarize the conversation from the 5 principals that we met with on those 2 particular issues. And as far as whether middle school students should be able to travel out of state, it was a consensus unanimous that it would not be in the best interest of the district for our middle school kids to be traveling out of state. One of the reasons, a few reasons for that. Number one is when you think about our high school, we have 5 administrators at the high school. So when we have a group out with an administrator that has to go with them, we still have a pretty large contingent of our administrative staff there. Our middle schools only have 3 administrators, a principal and 2 assistant principals. Having one of the administrators gone places a pretty big burden on our middle schools.
Wait, pause. Sorry, I'm losing my voice. So you're saying that administrators have to go with them
Yes.
when they go out of state? Okay, I didn't know that. Okay, so
And that-
what about that cost as well?
And that
It's included in here.
Okay,
it's all calculated part of the
but
per student
they're
cost.
out.
Yes,
but
they are.
have to go. Okay.
And as you looked at what's going on in March, we had a number out, the week before spring break or over spring break, actually, for some of these folks being gone. So yes, the administrators do have to go. No, it's okay. Second thing that our folks talked about was the difficulty of managing 7th and 8th graders. That so far from home. Would be something that they thought was significant. They brought to my attention, and they believe that middle school students should have something to look forward to in high school. High school, as you can see, that a number of the groups do take these trips and have the opportunity to do so. At least a couple times at the high school level. Some only one time during their high school years. They felt that as well. Then asked about the groups being allowed to go every year. What was the administrative feedback related to that? And the group did not believe that these different groups should go every single year, and for a few reasons. One is the financial impact for families involved, and this could be big. Obviously, we see some of the financial impact that is up there on the screen for each of these different groups, and you can see the total impact that it's had over the past 5 years on folks in our community that give to the school district in support of our students. And we do. We're in a great community that bends over backwards to support our kids, but we're asking a lot of our folks in this community to support these groups and athletics and the education foundations and the PTOs and the other booster clubs and many of the other things that we do around here. And so they noted that as that financial impact for those, and then for our families could be big. They talked about the equity among our various schools and among the people within the program. Being able to do that. Perhaps you're involved in an activity, or you're that people and families who are involved in that activity have a lot of money to be able to do this, and maybe some don't. And so they highlighted the equity component among that as well. One of the things that I had not thought about that they brought up to us was the staff time involved and the burnout involved with taking these large trips. It's a huge undertaking. When you think of an orchestra or a band or these large groups of folks, kids and chaperones and staff and administrator going out of state, it is a big undertaking. And quite frankly, it takes about a couple years to plan to do these. We, under current administrative regulation for us, we have to have these in by 120 days before the trip occurs, or at the beginning of the school year, whichever is earlier. So this work has to be done. Many of these trips take place in the spring, but this work has to be done in the spring or the summer to get everything in order, so we can have everybody know the parameters that surround these trips. And then the principals actually brought up the possibility of perhaps we could even go back to every 4 years. I asked them, though, to go back and get some feedback from the sponsors and directors that oversee these programs before we really consider that, and they did. This was the Wednesday before spring break. We had spring break. Many of these folks went on trips, and now we're in the second day after spring break. So I do appreciate Mrs. Elder and Mrs. Parkerson getting this information. So so I want to share a little bit of the director and sponsor feedback in regards to that, though. We do have a couple groups that already go every 4 years, and those are our two drill teams, the Strutters and the Bells. I think they are fine with that. When we talked with some of that go every 2 years, orchestras, band, and choir, pretty much the consensus was they would like to keep the flexibility to go every 2 years that we have under a current policy. One of those folks said, kind of every 4 years, we like to take a really big trip, some place pretty far out of the state. In the 2 years in between, we like to take a smaller one that's maybe closer. I think it was this orchestra band, and 2 years ago that went to Louisiana, and did some work and performing there. So that was a little bit closer. And then I believe they went to New York City this last spring break. So that's one of the ways that they look at doing that. But they would like to see that stay at every other year. So that is some of the feedback that I've gotten, not only from our principal leaders, but sponsors in those particular areas.
Other questions? Thoughts?
I think I just go back to I totally understand what you're saying and the feedback. I appreciate the feedback. That's really important to hear what the principals have to say, especially at the middle school level, with a sponsor having brought this, to our attention in the first place, wanting to have that opportunity. I think I do go back to, as a board, as we look at what other school districts are doing, they're not putting the age parameters, again, not in the board policy. So I think I get from from the district level, those considerations. And we do, our current policy is very explicit on all the things that have to be done before. I mean, it's not like, oh, I want to go out of state and here we go. Just submit a request and it's rubber stamped. I don't know. I'm just kind of stuck on that 9 through 12. Later down the line, if there is an opportunity, and there has been one that's presented at the middle school level, do we as a board policy want to exclude age groups? Or do we encompass that it still goes through all of the necessary approvals, but we don't have that age requirement in our policy?
So what would that look like, and what does that look like in these other districts? If something like this were to come up, is it in open meetings? I don't understand how decisions are made. I mean, would it turn into like something like this every time where, we have it on workshop agenda and we discuss the merit of it?
So if it would be board approval in those particular instances, I believe that would be a board agenda item that would have to be done in an open meeting and voted on by the Board of Trustees. And the ones that are superintendent or superintendent designee, obviously the person in that position makes those decisions on weighs in on the merits of the request, and probably is guided by past practice. In many districts, it's guided by administrative regulations. I think Mrs. Green makes a good point. When you look at our policy compared to the others, ours reads more like an administrative regulation. So I think if we were to move to board approval or superintendent approval or change that, I would anticipate a much more robust administrative regulation about how often and what all is needed, bids, and those types of things that you see covered in policy.
I found it interesting that the 3 principals of the middle schools did not favor a change in the policy. I don't claim to be an expert on educating middle school kids, even though I've had 2 of them. Still trying to figure that out. But Yeah, right, I am. And now we're working on high school. The fact that those people aren't in favor of it, that's hard for me to overcome. I mean, my gut reaction to it is we've had a policy that seems to work pretty well, and we've had one instance where a group chose to participate in something that created an opportunity to go to Orlando. And without getting into the merits of that in any way, which I don't think the board ever wants to do, is get into the merits of various activities. I mean, but it seems to me that having a policy that's worked well, that we even have some administrators who want to make it more restrictive instead of less restrictive. And the fact that we have the three principals of the schools involved that would favor leaving it as is. I mean, again, that's going to be hard for me to overcome. I kind of get it from their standpoint, and then the pressure that they would be under as administrators. Because I mean, we've seen what parental groups who, I mean, I'm guilty. I push my kids, and we're involved in activities, and we're seeing the extreme in the news these days with the, what do they call it, Varsity Blues scandal. I thought that was a clever name. About the people, I've seen this in the news, yeah, the parents who gave bribes to college coaches for their kids, and to start introducing elements of groups like that at the middle school level in public education. Again, I'm not saying that those people would do that, and I'm not saying these people are like that are doing this. I'm just saying I can see that dynamic unfolding when we have involved, aggressive parents pushing for the best for their kid, putting a lot of pressure on an administrative staff that's already stretched thin, trying to meet the needs of educating middle school students. Now, again, that's me not being an expert in it. I'm just a parent who's been through it. Like, I think most all of you, you're probably there, yeah. But that's kind of where my general thought is right now after hearing what the principals of the schools involved thought.
I completely see where you're coming from on that, and I agree to the most of that. The only thing that's standing out, that it keeps standing out and has stood out, is this a board policy, or is this more of an administrative policy? Do we need to have an age restriction coming from the board? Is that our duty, or is that what we put into the administrative hands to make those decisions? What if down the line there is an extraordinary circumstance where something comes about with middle school? This could be that, I don't know. Do we want to have a policy that is that narrow, I guess, from an age perspective? That's what I'm more focused on. Again, I totally respect whether the middle school, that is approved or that comes down or that's recommended, but is it the work of the board to dictate that policy? I guess that's where I'm kind of coming.
To me, that's a fair question.
I think so too, and I keep coming back to that we're here to educate the kids and to help with that education, right? I mean, that's what we're in the business of, is education. Sorry. So I keep asking myself, I mean, is this, if the decision, whatever decision we come down on this, either way, does this enhance or hurt their education? Either way we come down on it. I mean, I don't, y'all think.
I can tell you, I don't know. But in that situation, kind of like we did in our discussions on the drug testing, where I had, I'll call them not insignificant personal concerns. When I heard from the experts and the people who are involved with those kids on a day-to-day basis on what they thought would be a helpful thing, I deferred to their judgment. I mean, that's why I say it's hard for me to take my personal feelings and try to override what those who are on the ground, so to speak, the input they provided. Now, with that said, I mean, to me, I think it's a fair question whether or not we should have it in policy at all at a board level or kick it down and have some administrative regulation. I can see the administration not wanting that. That puts them in a difficult position. I think as long as you have a set of rules and policies in place ahead of time, and aren't trying to react to a particular situation or trying to weigh the merits of a particular group's opportunity, for lack of a better word, then I think you're okay, but it's still difficult. And then, to me, if we as a community and we're representatives of that community, as well as the administration say, well, we'll make those exceptions for the high school level, and we've decided we don't want that for kids below high school, then I think it's fine to have it at that policy because it's a bright line and it's very clear. And, well, people know. And it's like, well, okay, you're not taking a national trip or an out-of-state trip. Well, in theory, it could be international. I didn't see anything that limits it. Is it limited to U.S.?
No, international would be out of state.
Yep. I mean, the reason I ask, I mean, I literally did that. I walked into Mexico 3 days ago. Now, I had my passport and came back legally. It was all on the up and up. But, I mean, we don't have that limit either, right? So to me, I don't have a problem with having a bright line rule that's that clear, and saying, yes, it's appropriate at the high school level based on the rules and regulations. Below high school, it's not. But I sure am interested in what you all think. I mean, I'm not, I don't feel that strongly about it because I don't know all the ins and outs. That's why I keep going back to, well, what did the people who do deal with it, what are their thoughts? And that carries a lot of weight with me.
It does me too. I mean, 100%. I just don't know. I keep going back to, is it really the board's policy to put the age limit? Or is that something that the administration should handle through the policy that's already dictated and all? I mean, it is very clear, all the things you have to do to go on an out-of-state trip. Is it, for lack of a better term, overreach for our board to have this part, the age restriction in the policy, or should we have this, let the administration consider these requests at their level? That's where I'm coming from.
Thoughts? Well, I mean, one thing, I mean, we can always ask the administration what they think on that. But two, I mean, are you saying, well, we would mandate that the administration not put an age restriction? Because, you know, if I'm a clever administrator and I don't want it, well, I just turn around and say, well, this policy's worked great. We will authorize trips 9 through 12 and not authorize anything below it. For those 9 through 12, you meet the following criteria. Basically push this down to an administrative regulation and have our policy read like these, kind of like Sci-Fair that references FMG. I mean, so to me, there's two ways like that, and I I certainly don't think it's appropriate for the board to say, if a group comes to you and checks a lot of boxes, administration, you have to let them go out of state. So I mean that we're just looking at, well, what does our governance structure look like at that point?
Dr. Ely, do you have any recollection of why this is worded more in detail than other school districts, or
I don't know why, because
is
it's,
there any history?
I'm sure there is, but I don't know why we were very specific on this. I've been told that it goes back to the early 2000s, and we at that time obviously we had one high school and we had a number of groups taking some different trips, and from what I have been told, that the board at that time wanted to make sure we put some specifics into that. My real familiarity with this policy reaches back to 2012 when we made that change, or 2014, whenever it was, based on the opening of the second comprehensive high school and making that change from 4 years to 2 years for kids who were on athletic teams, because as freshmen they wouldn't have the opportunity to be in that varsity deal. So that's my best recollection. When you look at the others, we have non-standard language in there. We have very specific language in there, and those who came before us put that in there for, I'm sure, for some reasons. I just don't know exactly what they all are.
Can you elaborate more on your administrative meetings of what I know it says in comments, but do you think there's one way or the other that they would want it under FMG policy or more of administrative policy?
I didn't ask our administrators that question, and then whether it's board policy or administrative regulation, if you're sitting in the chair of a principal, it's the same thing to them. So for me, as I look back at this, and I've been superintendent now 5 years and deputy superintendent before that, so I've seen a number of these trips go through. I think board policy FMG local is an effective policy and served us well. Over the years, we had a real need to make an adjustment to it back about 5 years ago or so, and we did, and I think that was an effective change. It would be my recommendation that we would keep the policy as it is and restrict the travel to grades 9 through 12, and that we would allow groups to take trips every other year. I think it has served us well. We've had this one instance right here where we've had a request to look at it differently. As I go through and search my own soul and think about think about the reality of having 12 to 14-year-olds out of state and working with them in that type of environment, the possibilities that we could have for real inequities among schools and among families who have to come up with this additional funding, the possibility of having to do this every year, and the real inequities that could possibly bring to light. I would recommend that we would keep the policy as it is. Now, if the board wants to look at doing it a different way, certainly willing to entertain that and move forward with a different type of structure. But those would be our thoughts and my thoughts as well.
Let me ask, while I've got you on that point, do you have a preference whether or not that policy is an FMG policy local or at FMG regulation level? Am I articulating that correctly?
No, you are. It does kick it down to the administrative level, and gives, when you have it at the board policy level, it is I think you use the word bright line. Everybody understands what it is. It's a little stronger at the board policy level than it is at the administrative regulation level. If we were to make a change and do more of the generic language where board or superintendent approval and then have a regulation, I would imagine we would go through a pretty rigorous determination of what regulations would be important for us and what parameters and strictures we would want to put on out-of-state travel. So that was a lot of words to say. I don't really have a preference either way. We could do it either way. I can see the value of having it at the policy level.
I just, I'm really, the only thing I'm really struggling with is what policy or regulation, or something I hadn't even thought about till tonight. So not on my radar. And I probably would need to just chew on that a little bit. I don't know about y'all, but hearing from the administrators, the principals at the campuses, I mean, to me, that's as far as the request that would have come before us if it was possible, I mean, to hear their opinion on it, that carries a lot of weight with me, as I know it does with y'all. So I'm really only struggling with what you just asked Dr. Ely, Jeff.
Agreed. That's
And I don't,
my struggle.
and I don't know how, I mean, well, the struggle's real, but at the same time, I also know that, well, if we want to put this down to a different level or whatever, it's probably going to read exactly like this. And so I'm not sure what,
I think that's where I'm at, and I think the fact that it would be putting more pressure on the superintendent, whereas it's the board, I think that's kind of like the way I like it, the way it is. I think that's what would lead me to that. Instead of putting pressure on one, it's pressure on 7.
Thanks for that.
And it's kind of like, as a parent, well, so I'm sitting here thinking, and I'm like, it's like gray, black and white, kind of, and I live in the world of gray. I do. I think everything's gray, except for a couple things. And this is one of those things, the more I think about it, for me, this is pretty black and white, especially after hearing what the administrators have to say and all the different reasons. They didn't just say, they had a bunch of different reasons for what they said. And back to what I was mumbling about before I started saying black and white and gray, I do think that maybe it should stay at board policy, because that way it's definitive. Is that too harsh of a word to use? I don't know. There's not as much interpretation. Am I understanding policy and administrative clear enough?
I think it's less likely to have exceptions at the board level, if that makes sense. Does that make sense to y'all?
Well, the way it reads, there wouldn't be any exceptions.
yeah, that was my,
Other than approaching the board and getting them to change. A lot like this. It is more definitive. I mean, to me, unless, I get that, what you two are saying. And the only thing I would say is, we can digest it more, or if you feel like you want to digest that particular issue more, and if you would rather it be at policy level, I'm fine with that. If you would rather see it roll down to FMG regulation level, I don't feel strongly one way or another. And if you had a strong preference on it, kind of my gut reaction is what Mr. Schaefer said, and that I like that bright line strength, take pressure off the administration. It's like, look, here's where we are as a community. Let's focus on other efforts at the middle school level. I mean, you can win state, but we're not going out of state at that level, if that's where we are. And then that kind of puts the issue to rest, and people can go on worrying about other issues instead of feeling like, well, we have this particular opportunity, and whatever the group is, I'm certainly not picking on the group before us, because, I mean, if it's not them, it will be somebody else. I mean, we all have kids who have been involved, and so we know in all the array of activities that all we have to do is go pressure the administration, and we'll get our exception. And I can see it being an issue for the administration if if we do kick it down to FMG regulation. But if you don't care, then I don't really have that big a preference either.
I just would reiterate that I think this policy has served us well over the many years, and I would prefer it be at the policy level. If it's the will of the board, though, to move it down to the administrative level, we can work with that. Put a lot of those strictures into place and processes into place. But you know, as I look at as how we've gone, we've had a good amount of travel throughout this district, and the things that we've put into place to ensure that we're getting the best value, that we're traveling in the safest manner, and have the most oversight with our particular groups, I think has been positive for us.
I once again have no major strong opinion other than it ain't broke. I don't see any major reason to fix it. Where it is means I'm kind of indifferent. Other than under no circumstances would I vote require approval from the board for an out-of-state student trip, which is ludicrous, in my opinion.
Plenty of districts do it, Dr. Wilson.
I see that, and those districts are
Some of our neighbors,
not us. So there you go.
a lot of our neighbors.
Okay. So where do we go from here? I mean, looking for guidance from you guys. I mean, I can start giving options and you can say,
Well, I've personally, I've heard our superintendent say he would prefer to leave it where it is, and I've heard 4 board members essentially say the exact same thing. So, I mean, I think if somebody wants to make a push, we can talk about it, but I haven't heard any great giant argument to change it at this point.
okay,
I think it's a good logical argument to say what level should this be at, but I have no idea. I mean, it is what it is. I've clearly gotten in trouble for saying that about 1 billion times now, but it is, I mean, I just don't. Anyways,
all right. Anything anyone else needs on that? I mean, I don't think, I mean, we don't have to take any action on that.
If we're not
If
changing,
we're not
we do
changing
take
it.
action.
We can just move on. But before we do, I want to make sure everyone's got a chance to say their piece. And if there's other information or other issues or other angles we need to hit, let's hit it. Anyone? All right.
Okay.
Then I'm going to move us to item C3.
Thank you.
Consideration, discussion related to board policy GKD local regarding private counselors in schools. Dr. Ely.
Thank you, Mr. Harris, members of the board. We're talking again about other local policy that we have that governs some of the things that we do in College Station ISD. The one we're going to discuss now, we don't have any policy language. We want to start a discussion with the 7 of y'all about something we're proposing for College Station ISD and really for our kids and for the safety and mental health welfare of some of our kids. So policy GKD local cover, the use of College Station ISD facilities. And it not only how we rent out our fields and gyms to different outside groups, but also the use of our school buildings for outside entities during the school day. For right now, we don't allow others, for-profit people, to come into our buildings and have access to our facilities and to our students for the purposes of business or making a profit or working with our kids at all with one exception. That exception happens to be in the area of band, orchestra, and choir. We do have a provision that allows those folks who are working with our kids in band, orchestra, choir, things like that, and are engaged with them and their families through private lessons to come to the school and work with them during their band, choir, or orchestra period. We don't have a lot of that going on, but we do have some. I think some of the thinking behind that, and we've had this policy for a number of years, is, when you're a band director, you've played one or two instruments, you haven't played all of them. And we do have some of our folks who are in band, for instance, and may need clarinet lessons or work with somebody who does that. And we have the structure in place, and they work with them during the band period and those types of things. So that is the only exception that we have made in regards to that. What we'd like to discuss with you now is the opportunity to expand that exception to one additional one, and that would be for private mental health counselors who are working with our kids in that type of counseling arrangement. What we'd be talking about is a parent and a kid have an agreement with an outside counselor group, and instead of trying to meet with them after school or on the weekends or in the evenings, be able to have those counselors meet with the kids inside the school day in our facilities, and that does a couple things. One, in our community, we're seeing the lack of time and available resources in the mental health community for our kids to be able to go and see these folks. If we allow them to be able to come into our schools and see during the day, not only do they don't have the pressure of trying to see them after school or in the evening when we have all sorts of other people still competing to try to see those same counselors, but we cut down also on the traffic time to and from school. That's what we're talking about, people with a pre-existing relationship with these particular folks. What we're not talking about is mental health services where we say, okay, Molly, you have to go down and see the mental health counselor as a result of something that happened during school. This is not something that we're just putting people in to see outside folks. It's for people who already have this type of relationship. There's a lot of things that would have to be worked out. One of the things we would have to do is amend our school board policy. Additionally, we would have to work with outside agencies, work with our policy and legal representation to talk about some of those things that we would need to do in regards to the agreements that the memorandum of understanding we would have with the groups, the types of permissions that we would have to have from the parent and guardian. And so there's a lot of things that we would have to work through. But really what we're trying to do is just start that conversation about an idea that we've had to be able to leverage resources that exist in this community to the benefit of our students and some of our neediest students, and start that conversation. So I've kind of talked a little bit around it. There's more things that we would like to share, but I guess I'd like to pause right now. Molly, is there anything else that you would like to jump in and talk about right now, or throw it open to the board for your questions or comments initial?
So we, as Dr. Ely said, we're really looking at improving access for our students, reducing interruption to instructional time. And while there are a lot of logistical considerations, I think that anything that we can do to improve that access for our students is certainly a positive thing. Those are the kinds of things that we can work around. We've been in contact with our legal counsel about some of the specifics, and they commended us on really thinking outside of the box with this. And so we really just wanted to open up the conversation this evening as we think about it, beginning with a policy change first.
So we kind of hit you cold with that. So
Well, I can tell you at first blush, I think it's fantastic, particularly given some of the news stories over the last year or two and the safety issues that we've had to deal with. So anything that deals with mental health and getting people help they need, I'm in favor of. I do have a question or two. I'll start with, this is for Mr. Martindale. Any potential impact on the weighted daily attendance? I mean, I could see this potentially helping, and that kids miss fewer class periods if they just walk down the hall and go to a room, or
for average daily attendance, if you come to school and you leave to go to a medical appointment, doctor, dentist, orthodontist, mental health counselor, and you come back during that day, you are counted as present for purposes of ADA.
Okay.
So it would not help in that respect.
Okay.
It would,
Wouldn't hurt.
But in the sense that the travel time to and from campus, if you were able to get time during the day, it actually would be more time in actual instruction.
Miss less class.
Correct.
these types of appointments are typically on a weekly or bi-weekly basis. And so the impact instructional time could be substantial if that student was having to leave and travel, maybe over into Bryan and back and have an hour for an appointment. And so we really feel like that would be a benefit. This certainly would not replace the work that we're doing in schools with our school counselors and having mental health counselors and licensed specialists in school psychology. This would really be an attempt to provide better wraparound services so that students could access private services as well.
So it doesn't impact all the services we provide under, is it ARDS?
Right. For
idea.
students who are eligible in special education that may have counseling services in their individualized education plan, it would not impact their ability to access any of that. In fact, if they were also seeing a private counselor, we would ask the parent for permission to communicate so that we could develop a plan that better bridges that home to school gap.
Okay.
I mean, yeah, at first blush, this is fantastic. I love this. Anything to help in this area. A question I have, and I realize this is a dumb question, but I get to
Don't
ask
let
it.
that stop
Oh,
you.
I won't. It's going to get asked. But I'm assuming, we've talked to counselors in the area, and what's been their reaction? Because obviously it's not going to be super convenient for them, or maybe it will, but.
So that was definitely the beginning of the conversation. If we were to consider this, is there even anyone out there that wants to come into our schools? And so Chrissy Hester, as you know, our Director of Student Services, who oversees our counseling program, met with several providers that do see adolescents in the area, and they said they would absolutely consider it, because right now it's very hard for them to schedule appointments after school because they are so inundated. The level of care available for children and adolescents in our area is significantly less than the need. Part of that is that we don't have a consistent place for inpatient care locally, and so there are less providers willing to work in our area. So we really began the conversation there, and there was definitely interest.
What a great idea.
Yeah.
Great idea.
I commend you for this idea. This is phenomenal. I just want to make sure I understand. So it's existing relationships. It wouldn't be that you can now sign up for scheduling with these providers who decided, right? So so if I had an appointment that I could meet my therapist or my counselor at school.
We would not be in the business of referring
Okay.
students to any particular provider. We would not be advocating for students to, go to a specific person. We can certainly provide information about any available.
I was going to say, I'm not totally opposed to that either, by the way, because
Right.
I think that that's a big question that parents have is who can I go talk to, who is available. So I almost see the flip side of that is if we start this program and then there are a group of providers out there that are willing to do this, that we could even help more children.
We may
So,
be able to provide some
Right.
options for parents.
got it. Are any other districts doing anything like this?
I don't believe so.
Okay. Cool.
We have obviously addressed mental health services for our kids that Mrs. Perry just pointed out. We have licensed school specialists in school psychology. Just a reminder, as we go through the budget process, we added an additional crisis counselor, mental health counselor to the district this year. So we during the budget process last year. So now we have two of those folks, one who works at the elementary level, one who works at the secondary level. And this is just, again, this is additional opportunities for our kids to be able to try to really do what we can for kids and their needs that we have in this community.
I have an unrelated but related question to that. When we have something that's tragic, that a kid that dies or in some kind of accident, and you hear on the newspaper that counselors are assisting, are those our internal counselors, or do we make an exception to that time to bring other counselors in?
So the answer is yes and yes. We do, since we're a large district and we have quite a large number of counselors, the first line will be local CSISD counselors who will go, and this crisis team that will go to that campus, meet with the staff, quite possibly go through the student's schedule that day if it happens to be a death or that type of situation. We do also work with Region 6, and if we need more resources from outside the district, then we can rely on our folks at the Region Service Center to help us bring other counselors from outside as well. So we do have that additional help. We haven't really needed it because by virtue of our size and the number of professionals that we have here.
I'll just chime in and say that I also think it's a great idea. And Nugent, you stole my question, and it was a good question.
Sorry.
No, but I think it's a really good idea to try to offer this and this service. I think it will, like Amanda said, I think it will it will help the parents out. Maybe even parents that didn't, they didn't think about finding these services for their children, thought, well, hey, maybe this would, my child would benefit, but God, I don't have time, and I can't take off work in the middle of the day. Maybe this is something more students, more kids will get help if it's more convenient.
So that's what we kind of want to do today, is just introduce the idea to the board, see if there's willingness to continue forward with the process. There's a lot of work still need to be done, draft policy language, draft agreements. So I'm seeing the head nods around the table that we need to continue forward in this and continue the discussion. Is that fair?
I think it's cool that we can't borrow the language from anybody else because this
Right.
starts with y'all. That's very cool. Districts will have to steal what y'all wrote. So let's make it good.
Definitely did not have sample language for this one.
That's great.
I appreciate the support. I really do. I appreciate the support and the real eagerness on the part of U7 leaders to try to find alternative ways to meet the needs of our kids. So thank you for your leadership.
We look forward to seeing Miss Perry back.
That's right.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Item C4, consideration, discussion, and possible action related to setting a date and time for a management oversight workshop for technology. Dr. Ely.
So now's the time we ask you to take your phones out and look at your calendars. As the board is aware, we do management oversight workshops twice a year, usually in October, November, and again in April, to discuss one of 6 major business systems that we have. The next one that is up in April is CSISD's technology program, which is a great time because we're in the process of redoing our long-range technology plan. So what I have before you is if we could get out our calendars and try to find a time to do this. They usually take 2 hours to do, so we could do a 5 to 7. Sometimes we have done this at the lunch hour, maybe 11 to 1. And I don't have a bunch of dates in front of me right now, but if anybody has some dates in April that would work, I'm happy to hear them. Or dates that don't work.
I'm going to be gone the week after Easter, the 21st through the 27th.
Thank you, Mr. Schaefer. You're going to be gone the 21st? Okay. So the third week is not good?
The first week.
Fourth week.
Fourth week, sorry. Mrs. Green?
First week of April would be really tough.
Okay. All righty.
Tuesday, April 9th, 11 to 1. I'm just throwing it out there because otherwise we're
What
all
about
going to be
Mondays?
Yeah, Tuesday's bad.
Tuesdays are
Okay.
bad.
Tuesdays are bad during the day.
Monday, April 8th, 11 to 1.
Let me check.
I did not come prepared.
I have a meeting, sorry.
How are we looking, David?
Wednesday, April 10th, 11 to 1.
I'm free.
I have a previously scheduled CSISD meeting.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, executive.
It's
Which we could move.
Thursday, April 11th, 11 to 1.
Could y'all make that meeting
We could,
Or after, is it too long during the workday?
yeah, well, I don't think we could do it before or after. We could move it though if we have to. Does the 11th work? I mean, it doesn't matter to me when we do it.
Thursday the 11th?
11 to 1, I have a meeting at 11, sorry.
Does the 10th work for you?
The 10th does work.
We
I'm with you.
I know, but I
with
mean,
you.
that's all I'm just looking, whether
Yeah.
we can move the
We can move
exec
executive.
to the,
9th or 11th?
we can do 11th, yeah.
Does the 11th give us?
11th work?
Yeah, it's fine.
Okay.
So we'll move exec to 11th and do this on the 10th?
Works for me.
Okay.
Okay.
So we're saying Wednesday, 4:10 at 11 to 1. Correct? 11 to 1?
In here?
In somewhere. We'll find a place.
And it's
Management oversight workshop, 2 hours for technology, yes. While most of us have our phones out as well, we do need to do Team of 8 training. That's a 3-hour commitment. I would like to do that in in April as well.
we just knocked out half of April, so narrowed it down for you.
Does that need to be a night thing?
It
or an
can, we've
afternoon
done that a
thing?
number of ways. We've done that 3 to 6. We've done it 4 to 7. I don't know that we've done it 11 to 2, but maybe we have. Anything work on the week of the 15th? We do have a regular board meeting that week on the 16th. Ooh, that's not a good one. Actually, it does not work well for me unless we do it on the 15th.
Monday.
Monday the 15th.
I'm open the 15th.
That's fine with me.
You good?
Monday the 15th?
I'm gonna be, I think I'm gonna, what time are we looking at?
I don't know. We could do early. We could do afternoon.
Would later work?
Yeah, what works better?
Like
It's an
we've-
accountant on tax day.
I was going to say, it's accounting, it's tax day. 4? How many hours do we do it?
3.
4 to 7? Would that,
3 to 6, I'm good. I just didn't want it during lunch.
3
No,
to
I
6?
mean,
I'm with-
I got clients coming in, and we'll be finished by 2.
I like 3 to 6.
3 to 6
On the 15th?
on the 15th. Okay. Thank you. We'll be following up in transmittal with these to confirm these dates. I appreciate y'all putting them in your phone right away. I'll put mine later. Okay, that was item 4.
All right. We are adjourned.
Thank you.